To that, meantime, let's bring in Arkansas Republican Senator Tom Cotton. So I want to ask you about the MiGs, because the United States was pushing Poland to send them into Ukraine. Poland said, we're not going to do that, but we will give them to you, United States, at Ramstein Air Base for you to do whatever you like with them. Here's how Jen Psaki tried to explain her way out of that not being a good idea.
I think it's pretty clear it doesn't require a military expert to understand why having planes fly from a U.S. airbase into a contested part of a country where there is a war is not in our interest and not in NATO interests.
So she said, I don't understand how it's in our interest or NATO interest to send them from an American airbase into Ukraine, but it's fine to send them from a Polish NATO airbase into Ukraine.
Yeah, John, I literally don't understand what the administration is saying here. This is just more dithering, more hesitating half measures. You know, we've seen this time and again, whether it was on central bank sanctions or on the international payment systems known as SWIFT versus Stinger aircraft missiles, now Russian oil imports. The administration doesn't want to do something, and then ultimately it follows Congress or it follows our NATO allies. The administration said just 2 days ago, the Secretary of State said that we'd give a green light to Poland transferring these MiGs. When Poland turned around and said, well, actually, we'd like you to do it because we're smaller than you are and we're right next to Russia in a way you're not, the administration said, no, we couldn't possibly do that. It would be escalatory. Well, how would it be escalatory for the United States to transfer these Polish aircraft as opposed to Poland, a NATO ally, to transfer them? And it is bigger than this as well, John. It's not just this Polish aircraft. There are other Eastern European countries that used to be in the Warsaw Pact under Soviet Russia's dominion that have other kinds of aircraft. They have other kinds of missiles. They have other kind of enemy air defenses that we would probably like to see transferred as well. So this is going to continue to play out. It's time for the administration to stop slow rolling things, to stop asking lawyers to take the lead. It's time for leaders to take the lead, and that's what President Biden needs to do.
Senator, we look at the situation on the ground there, and I'm sorry, I'm looking down. I'm just trying to get brand new details on this horrific situation in Mariupol of the maternity ward there and the warnings that there are children in the rubble and just how horrific of an attack that is. And you just wonder what the hours and days look like ahead, as Benjamin Hall was just reporting to us that, you know, obviously Kyiv in the coming days, in fact, 24 hours from now is the assessment, could be under a much different situation than it is right now.
Yeah, Sandra, this is why we're in a situation where it's not days that matter, not even hours, but minutes. And every minute the administration spends with lawyers tinkering over details about whether we can transfer Stinger missiles, whether Poland can transfer these aircrafts, or we can take this, that, or the other step, is the risk of Ukrainian lives lost. They need to start moving at the speed of warfare, not the speed of bureaucracy, to try to help the Ukrainian army and really all the Ukrainian people defend themselves from this brutal aggression by Vladimir Putin.
You know, Senator, let me just swing back to the MiGs by raising this idea that Russia would like to make this about a confrontation between Russia and the United States. Dmitry Peskov, the Kremlin mouthpiece, said that the United States is waging economic war against Russia. Do you expect that Russia will try to retaliate in some way economically? And if the United States were to take those Polish MiGs and transfer them from Ramstein to Ukraine, could Russia then say, a direct act of aggression by the United States, and spread that information across Russia to say, we told you the United States were the bad guy in this?
John, they might say that, but how is that any different from providing Ukraine with anti-tank missiles that are killing Russian soldiers? How is it any different from providing them anti-Stinger missiles that shoot down Russian aircraft? If we sit back on our back foot and we allow Vladimir Putin to set the terms, then we might as well just cede Ukraine and all of Europe and ultimately all of North America as well. We cannot allow Vladimir Putin to set the terms on which we are going to support a sovereign nation, Ukraine, to defend itself against brutal aggression. The administration's posture reminds me a little bit about what U.S. Grant said in 1864 when he took over the entire Union Army. And all the generals in the Army of the Potomac, after 3 years of fighting Robert E. Lee, were obsessing about what Lee was going to do. And Grant said, I'm so tired of hearing about what you think Lee is going to do. You think he's going to turn a double somersault and land on our rear and both of our flanks at the same time. You should go back to your commands and decide what we're going to do to Lee. That's what NATO should be doing. That's what the United States should be doing. We should get on the front foot, quit dithering, quit hesitating, and take the initiative to help the people of Ukraine defend their territory.
Senator, I'll ask you to be more specific on that in just a moment, as I quote Vladimir Zelensky saying people, children are under the wreckage in Mariupol, calling this an atrocity. He went on to talk about the blocking of humanitarian aid to these people, saying Russian forces are holding hostage more than 400,000 people from humanitarian aid, evacuation from Mariupol. What do you mean we should be on our front foot? Be more specific. How should we be responding?
Yes, Sandra, take, for instance, these Polish MiGs. Rather than waiting for Poland to take action, rather than over-lawyering the situation when Poland does, we should be leaning forward, having encouraged Poland to transfer these aircraft and any other aircraft and weapons they had days ago. The same thing with other former Warsaw Pact nations like Slovakia and Hungary and Romania and Bulgaria. Many of these countries want to support Ukraine, even more than they already are. But when you have the United States and perhaps some of our other Western European NATO allies being very hesitant and cautious about it, they're less likely to put forward that support because they're at an even greater risk of
Can I just follow up to that 1 second? Because Jen Psaki was asked about this just a moment ago, and also Jen Griffin just spoke about this at the Pentagon, and the logistical hurdles that Psaki said are involved in Poland providing these MiGs to Ukraine. Her words, she said, carting them down the street is not as easy as you may think. They have to be taken apart and put back together. You have to have people who can do so. To that you say what?
First, I would say Jen Psaki is not exactly a military or logistical expert. And second, our Department of Defense has unfortunately got a lot of lawyers in there as well that is going to find every reason in the world not to take action that we should. This reminds me a little bit in 1973 when Israel's back was up against the wall in the Yom Kippur War, and the Department of Defense and the Department of State was finding every reason not to act. And Richard Nixon said, send every plane that flies with everything that shoots. And that helped lead that war to a stalemate, so Israel wasn't overrun. That's what this president should be doing right now with the stubborn bureaucracy that's giving every reason in the world not to take more action to help the people of Ukraine.
I guess there are a couple of ways that you could get those MiGs to Ramstein. You could take them apart, box them up, and ship them over land, or you could put a pilot in it and fly it there, and then fly it from Ramstein into Poland. But again, this is all presenting logistical problems that the United States can't seem to get over. Let me ask you about oil. Because the Biden administration has now banned the sale of Russian oil, or banned the import of Russian oil. Some private companies were doing that already. But there doesn't seem to be any kind of a concrete plan to back up the loss of that oil. And it may not be that significant. But the Wall Street Journal is reporting that we have gone, or we're trying to go, to Saudi Arabia and the UAE to get them to pump more oil, and were rebuffed. The Wall Street Journal writing, Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and the UAE's Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan both declined U.S. requests to speak to Mr. Biden in recent weeks, the official said, as Saudi and Emirati officials have become more vocal in recent weeks in their criticism of American policy in the Gulf. The White House pushed back on this, saying, oh, no, he talked to the king back on February the 9th. But this idea that we're trying to get more oil from Saudi Arabia and from dictators like Maduro and from Iran to backstop us as opposed to going with U.S. energy, does that make any sense to you?
No, John, it makes no sense whatsoever. It was the right step to ban Russian oil imports. We could start producing more oil here in a matter of weeks, if not days, if the administration would stop its war on American oil and gas. We probably could have gotten more production from Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates if President Biden hadn't been shunning those two nations and intentionally ostracizing them for the last 14 months. Mohammed bin Zayed in the Emirates in particular is one of America's strongest allies and supporter in the Middle East, and President Biden has given them the cold shoulder for the last 14 months as they've been under attack by Iran's proxies. And now look where we're turning. We're turning to the Ayatollahs in Iran who still chant death to America. Or in Venezuela, we're going to a dictator, Nicolas Maduro, who our government doesn't even recognize as the legitimate head of state of Venezuela. When all we have to do is turn to America's oil and gas workers in places like Arkansas and Louisiana and Texas and North Dakota and encourage them and their investors to get American oil flowing again.
I mean, that's the crux of the issue, right? I mean, we're all having these conversations every single. It looks so obvious, Senator. It looks so obvious that we have a ton of these resources right here to be tapped into. Our neighbors, Canada, Mexico, plenty of oil. Why are we even talking about turning to Iran, Venezuela, Saudi Arabia? I mean, obviously huge producing countries, but we know, based on the last couple of years, how we can be energy independent.
Yeah, Sandra, it's mystifying, other than the fact that these eco-activists in the Democratic Party just want to feel good about themselves, about killing American oil and gas production. I mean, if they're worried about greenhouse gas emissions, where obviously Iran and Venezuela is going to create even more emissions because they don't have the same kind of advanced technology we do, there is no reason that we should not be producing more oil and gas in America right now, and for that matter, more nuclear power as well, that we can also help export to Europe to help them become more independent of Russian oil and gas.
Senator, it's good of you to come in this afternoon. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, Senator.